I'm Will Aubrey, and my buddy Joe Darnell is here with me, and today we're going to talk about Murray State basketball and recruiting and how things are shaping up for next season for the Racers. And Joe, if you look at the Racers, it's become a common theme. There's huge turnover in the roster once again. Now, they've managed to be very successful despite that, right, and I think they'll be successful again next season, but it does pose a challenge.
Absolutely, and what's interesting is you look at what Murray State's having to deal with, and it's not really different from what most of college basketball is nowadays. I mean, the number of transfers across the country in Division I are numbering in the hundreds every single year. And Murray State's been able to dodge the bullet a few times during coaching changes and stuff like that where generally transfers happen more often. They've been able to keep some guys and really keep a core of guys that you can build from. And I think that's the best part about what we're seeing here is, yeah, there's going to be some turnover in this roster, but the coaching staff has done a really good job of bringing in some new guys that show a lot of promise. And we'll see how they can get assimilated into the whole and made into a new team going forward for next season.
3 transfers.
Yep.
Ja'Kai Taylor.
Yep.
And Jalen Dupree.
Yep.
And Byron Hawkins.
Yeah. And really, all 3 transfers, you kind of look at it and you understand where they're coming from.
Right. Ja'Kai Taylor wanted to play.
He wanted to play. So he went to arguably one of the best Division II programs, and he's immediately eligible.
Indeed. And, Coach McMahon told me that, he would have been happy to have Ja'Kai continue here. It was just a situation where it was clear that if Ja'Kai stayed, he wasn't going to get a whole lot of minutes because they had better guards.
Right. And that's... you look at Ja'Kai, and he's a guy who did, while he was here, he did what he was asked to do. He came in and played the minutes. He never was a problem in the locker room. He just assessed his future as saying, you know what, I really want to play. I want to play, starters minutes. I want to be out there on the floor all the time. And quite frankly, going to Queens College in Charlotte, that's great. I mean, for basketball, that's like a Bellarmine type school. That is a high level. It's a step down in the divisions, but as for the quality of the team, that's fantastic. I mean, you look at what they've done every year. They were in the top 5 most of last year, and when you look at teams like that, University of Indianapolis, and you look at Bellarmine, you look at those teams that are a division lower than Murray State, but are national title contenders. You kind of understand the draw for a guy like Taylor, who really wanted to show what he could do at the collegiate level. Jalen
Dupree was a talented young man.
Absolutely.
He just had a bit of an attitude problem, and I think at the end of the day, a change of scenery was better for everybody.
Yeah, and when he first came in, he was one of those guys that was well-hyped, a 3-star recruit, and honestly, at different points in his career, absolutely showed that kind of potential and that kind of strength and ability. Last season, I said going in that Dupree was going to be the key to how far that Murray State team went. The team was really, really good, and Dupree was not
the
key to it. However, I think if Dupree had been able to keep himself on the straight and narrow and actually perform and play and develop and do the things that was asked of him in a way that let him see minutes later on in the season, I wonder if how the season ended would have been different. That said, he's a kid who's trying to play basketball and wants to go and play. He's going to Samford, where he will, after a year sitting out, will be a key cog to that team. At 6'9", 240 at Samford, with the skill set that he's shown in bursts at Murray State, he'll be one of the better players in this conference.
Byron Hawkins, the word that I got was that he just wanted to play point guard.
Yeah.
And you can't blame him for that. And he was not going to start at point guard ahead of John Morant.
No.
I would kind of like to have had Byron come back and, potentially even start at 2 guard.
Right.
But if he wanted to play point guard, he's graduated, so he gets to choose.
Yeah, and this is one of the effects of the graduate transfer rule. You might have kept a guy like Hawkins and told him, you know what, you're going to be a starter, but you're going to start at the off guard. You're not going to start as the primary number one. You're going to get a lot of time as the number one. As we do different sets, or depending on who's sitting and who's playing at any given point. You've shown the ability to do that at this level. You've been very effective at it. You probably keep that guy if the rules are different. But with the ability to transfer immediately, you kind of understand where he's coming from with it. He goes to a program that is rebuilding, and so he'll step into a starter's role day one, and honestly might be one of the better players in that conference.
Now let's take a look at the kids that are coming in this year's recruiting class.
Right.
Daquan Smith is up first. Tell me a little about him. Comes out of Mississippi, who, the state of Mississippi has been so great to Murray State here recently, especially Murray State basketball. You look at those kids, they've had some really good players come through that area to Murray State, and as such, you want to try to buy into that. I don't remember in the past few years a recruit having as much hype as what Smith has. I mean, he scored the ball a ton in high school. He was one of those guys that he just filled it up. Every time he got on the floor, he put the ball in the basket. And there's something to be said for that. And as such, he comes in as a 3-star recruit. He's one of those guys that he's in the Mississippi Dandy Dozen. He's one of the better players in the state of Mississippi. Got a lot of buzz, had a lot of success in high school. The question for me with all freshmen is who makes the next step to play in college. I think he's got all the tools. I think his position as being an off guard helps him. I know that he's got the ability to play the point guard. He played the point guard in high school, but point guard's kind of taken. It's taken, and he will have to both be able to be a catch-and-shoot guard and be able to accept being a catch-and-shoot guard, because that's going to be his primary role if he starts for Murray State this coming year.
Yeah, well, you look at what, and it's a different situation and a different player, but you look at what Isaiah Cannon did his freshman year. Now, he was a player who was, that he was challenged. He was coming in. There was like, there's not going to be a lot of minutes for this kid, because you had guards ahead of him who were very good when Isaiah Cannon came in. So you have a guy who just came and earned his minutes and took advantage of that, and was a spot-up shooter early on, but showed the ability to drive to the basket later. I think that Smith is going to have something very similar to that. I think he's going to have to adjust to the speed of the game. He's going to have to adjust to the physicality of it. But I think with his size and his frame, I think he's got that ability. I think he can come in and make an impact.
Look at Jonathan Stark. I mean, Stark, I'm sure he expected that he was going to be the point guard his senior year.
Right.
And Morant, he appears, and it's clear that he has to be the starter at the point.
Right.
Jonathan did an excellent job of not hunting shots.
Right.
And there were games where he would have 6 points at halftime.
Yeah.
And he didn't go out in the second half and suddenly try to put up as many shots as he possibly could.
Right.
He still let the game come to him, and I thought he did a great job in the role of two guard. And it doesn't, being a good catch-and-shoot guy doesn't mean that you can't ever penetrate or do things like that. Stark did those things. It means that you have to be happy with that being your role some of the time.
Right. Well, and you bring a great point with Stark. The story of Stark's senior year with the emergence of Ja Morant is that his percentages all went up. He became a more efficient player because he accepted a role. Now, his scoring numbers went down a little bit. Is anybody ever really going to talk about that? No, because he was the most electrifying scorer in the OVC last season. Are you really going to be upset that he had one less point per game or a half a point per game less? No, because all of his shooting percentages went up. His time on the floor went down, so he was fresher. He was the guy at the end of the game. You're like, look, just give him the ball. You know what I mean? You know what you're going to get from him. He had that ability.
And he didn't have to do things like take 30-footers.
Absolutely. You know, as much fun as it was his first year with the Racers, you know, going into the OVC tournament and him putting up monster numbers in the tournament where he's shooting, you know, his usage rate is just astronomical. I'd argue that his senior year was far more fun. Watching him play a role in the first half and almost have teams forget that he existed only in the second half to take open shots and knock them down at a clip that is unreal. That's so much fun to watch.
Now, here's one other thing about Daquan Smith.
Yeah.
He could wind up being the starter at two guard.
Wouldn't surprise me.
McMahon has shown by starting John Morant at the point as a freshman that he's not always going to go based on seniority when he decides who he's starting. And that, too, could have been a reason why Hawkins chose to transfer, because he wouldn't have been a lock to start at two guard.
Well, the biggest thing is, you know, I know a lot of fans have talked about it. You want to reward seniors. You really do. You want to reward those guys who've been there the entire time. But in all honesty, I want the guys on the floor who make the coach put them on the floor.
Yes.
Don't give them any other option. You watch them in practice, you watch them play, and you go, I can't sit this guy. You know, John Morant did that last season. It would have been totally reasonable for a coach before the first game, you know what, we're going to have Morant sit out this year and we're going to redshirt. That is a traditional, classic, 10, 15, 20 years ago college basketball coaching move that would have been acceptable there. Instead, he says, look, all the minutes are up for grabs. Who wants them? And you have a guy like Morant come in, and he earns that starting position next to an all-conference or player of the year on one side and a guy who had transferred in and was voted a team captain. You earn those minutes. That's a guy you want on the floor.
Absolutely.
I think Smith has that ability as well.
Mike Davis is an interesting player. So you look at what he did. Now, he was at Alabama Monroeville, JUCO program down in Alabama. Top 100 JUCO player, which some may scoff at, but in reality, that's a pretty good barometer of the potential of a player. He's kind of a miniature Terrell Miller.
Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more. I did not get to see him play. The coaches have got to see him play. What I'd like to see from a power forward is a little bit more scoring with his back to the basket. Not as a primary focus, but just having a tool in the toolbox. From what I've seen on video, this kid is great with the ball in his hands. Absolute face-up monster. If he's playing with his face to the basket, he's going to score points. He's physically gifted. He's strong. He's got a good first step and a good handle. He's got all the stuff you need from a guy like that. He's a good
three-point shooter.
He's a good three-point shooter. And actually, prior to the last couple of games, maybe even the last game of his JUCO season, was an immense three-point shooter, like 50% three-point shooter. From a guy who's 6'7", 230. I mean, this is not a small boy at all. This guy is a man. Is a full-grown man.
Yeah, I saw him listed at 6'6". Who knows? You know those heights that you get from high school are squishy.
Yeah, that's it. You know, if he's only 6'5", but he's 230 in real life and has ball skills, you'll be all right. You know what I mean? You look at some of those guys. I always think about guys like Ed Daniel, who you look at his written numbers and then you kind of stand next to him and you go, and then you watch him play and you go, how is this guy not 7 foot? You know what I mean? It's just you don't. Your size doesn't dictate how you play. How you play dictates your size. So let's see how this guy comes out. I'm interested to see what he does.
KJ Williams.
KJ Williams is another one of those guys. Now, he's a high school player. Another one of those Mississippi kids, dandy dozen, lots of length, good size, good frame, all the stuff you look for from a big that you can develop. You're looking at a kid who, personally, major upside. Major upside. He's good with the ball in his hands, loves to run the floor. I mean, all the things you want. When we're thinking about fast-paced, up-tempo Murray State basketball, bigs that run the floor, they just make you drool. You know what I mean? Those guys, when they do things well, they're hard to stop. I mean, look at Breon Sanchez last year against teams in the OVC tournament. Him running the floor, you're never going to look at Breon Sanchez and say he's an offensive machine, but he's athletic enough where he was the first guy down, and when you've got a point guard like Ja Morant, he's going to find you. And all of a sudden, you're doing a layup drills. I can hit a layup most of the time.
I would not expect Williams to get a lot of playing time as a freshman. Just in talking to Coach McMahon, what he told me was, we're excited to get him into our player development program.
Yeah.
That tells me that he thinks that this is somebody that can be really good in the future, but not necessarily somebody that he's going to be counting on immediately.
Right. Well, that's a perfect situation for a big. You've got a guy that you're going to say, hey, look, we're going to give you the opportunity to earn your minutes, but we're also going to give you all the tools to get better. As you're looking at this guy, he's got skills, he's got some abilities that jump off the page at you, but you're going from high school to college. The game fundamentally changes.
And he will have Breon Sanchez and Anthony Smith ahead of him as holdovers from last year, and then the junior college guy that we'll talk about in a little bit, Darnell Cowart.
Yeah, and so whenever you get to that point, it's kind of a no-lose situation for the coaching staff. If he comes in and he forces your hand and you have to play him, he's been pretty good.
Absolutely.
And if he doesn't, it's okay. You weren't relying on that this year. You want to develop him. You want him to learn the system and understand what we're trying to do. Physically develop. Get in the weight room. Get used to the physicality of D1 basketball, because he's going to be the guy next year that we're going to look to come in and start taking some serious minutes.
Jalen Johnson, local kid. So he's had a pretty tumultuous high school career. Nothing bad. He's not a bad kid, but transferred from Hoptown, went to Aspire Academy in Louisville to try to jumpstart his recruiting. Didn't really like it there. Came back to Hoptown and was really good. Physical, gritty kid, the kind of guy that you just give him the ball, you know what he's going to do with it, and played against some high-level talent in his district. That's the thing to look at. When we talk about local kids, we often talk about, well, Region 1 doesn't have a lot of great players. It's hard to gauge the players in Region 1. I can tell you in that region that Hoptown was in, Hoptown, Christian County, University Heights, 3 schools within 20 miles of each other, there's a lot of Division I basketball talent in that area. He wasn't going up against, and this is no offense, he's not going against some of these small, tiny schools that don't have enough bodies. He's actually playing against guys who have really high-level aspirations and goals, and he was holding his own and played really well. Going to be one of those guys that develops. You're not going to look at him and say, well, he's going to come in and take minutes and be an immediate starter, but the kind of guy that you would absolutely like to have in your system, learning, developing, getting better, because when he gets some time under his belt, could really turn into a great basketball player at Murray State. I mean, just one of those guys that you've got to have to make the leap to the next level. Javion Eads.
Another local kid. So went to JUCO.
Well, if you stretch the definition of local just a little.
Murray State has a campus in Madisonville. That's a local kid.
Okay.
So a kid from the greater Madisonville area went to JUCO and really blossomed. So he originally committed to Evansville out of high school, didn't attend, went to JUCO instead, had a really good run in junior college. Shooter, the kind of guy you got to have, had some good length, was a top 100 JUCO recruit, and quite honestly, one of those kids that you look at and you say, okay, this is what you got to have. Even if his game is the D and 3 kind of player, a player who shoots threes and plays defense for you, there's a lot of value in that, in the offense that I think we're going to be running next season with Ja Morant at the point guard. If you've got a guy that can do that, along with Shaq Buchanan, That's going to be a great attitude.
Does it bother you at all that he spent his freshman year at Evansville and didn't really do much?
Not really. Let me put it to you like this. He spent a year at a Missouri Valley Conference program practicing against Division I Missouri Valley Conference basketball players in a Division I weightlifting program, going to classes, doing the things that you need to do to be a student athlete. It was not for him, and he decided to go to JUCO. Those are the kind of guys that actually I think have a lot of value. That tells you how good of a player on a potential-wise that this isn't a Missouri Valley Conference player when he went to JUCO. I mean, this is a kid who you look at him and say, yeah, maybe not the best fit for him, maybe not the best situation, whatever, what have you, but you're going to give him an opportunity to come to the Ohio Valley Conference. Now, I look at the Ohio Valley Conference as a means to an end right now for the Racers. I tend to go with the Lindy Suter Conference, which is pick up some really good teams in the out of conference, some Missouri Valley teams, some SEC teams, whatever you can play, and then the top 2 or 3 teams out of your conference, and that's your conference schedule. All the other ones are ones you just kind of have to play. You have to play, the E.T. Martins and stuff like that of the world. So when you look at a guy like this is somebody that, a bunch of people have measured and said, yeah, this guy is a legit D1 player. He's at this level. He can play there. And what he showed at his sophomore year at JUCO backs that up. I'm interested to see what he comes in and does.
Now I'm going to throw you a changeup, a massive curve here.
Well, telling me about it's probably not the best idea, although if you've ever seen me swing, you could probably put it on a tee and tell me to hit it, and I'd miss 2 out of 3. So,
Kevin Brown, and I've mentioned him because he didn't play last year, and they redshirted him due to an injury. He's essentially a freshman.
Absolutely. Kevin Brown, to me,
there were those.
Arguably last year, he was the most hyped recruit that we had. And he kind of passes the eyeball test. This is a guy that he's a dead-eye shooter from outside. He has incredible length, good basketball IQ. Best yet, he wants to get better. He's one of those guys that you've got to force him off the floor. That has value. I think got unlucky with a lingering injury last year that might turn out to be lucky for him in the long run. Getting that redshirt year, I think coming in, he's the guy to me. He's got the most. If I'm picking a guy who's going to come in and take the majority of the minutes of newcomers, he's the guy that I put my finger on. This is a kid who could absolutely play basketball. Now he's going to be healthy. He's going to get a chance. I'm thinking that he can do something pretty positive. I'm interested to see what he does. He might be the X factor for this team going forward.
Anything else?
Yeah, let's look at guys like we've talked KJ Williams, we've talked Daquan Smith, we've talked Davis and Eves. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. There's one big piece that we haven't discussed.
Okay.
Darnell
Court. That's right. I forgot about him.
And what?
That would have been a big omission.
Yeah, it really would have. You want to talk about a big old boy. This is a kid, I don't know how big he is. We talked about the height being squishy.
His weight is squishy.
I don't know exactly what he's going to be bringing in. This is a kid that I've seen anywhere from 6'8" to 6'9", anywhere from 340 to 280 in weight.
Coach McMahon told me that he had lost 30 pounds, so...
Okay, so we'll split the difference. We'll say he's about a 290-pounder.
Okay.
That's a big old boy. Now, normally that's not a positive. You look at that and you go, well, he's big, he can't play D1, he can't do this, blah, 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 blah. I've seen the film on him. No, he's never going to jump out of the gym. But he's got good hands. He's got good feet.
He has good ball skills with either hand.
Absolutely. Has the ability to knock down jumpers.
And if you're not going to be the kind of kid that jumps out of the gym, a big old boy is a good thing to be because his size will allow him to keep his shot from being blocked.
Absolutely. I always think about certain guys whenever I see a body type that reminds me of Darnell. I think of guys like Robert Traylor at Michigan. Popeye Jones. Now, these guys all play basketball a little differently. But you look at a guy like Robert Traylor, you look at Popeye Jones, you look at those guys and you say, well, yeah, they don't quite look the part, and then you see what they can do. I don't really care how you look. If you can perform, I say let's go. You know what I mean? You look at that and you just find guys that are valuable pieces that don't seem to they don't pass the eyeball test. The eyeball test doesn't mean anything. It's the same concept whenever they talk about, well, how tall is he? How tall is he without shoes on? And the answer is, first off, we don't play basketball without shoes on. So that doesn't really matter. Second off, I'm not hiring him to change light bulbs. I want him to play basketball. How good of a basketball player are they? You don't have to be big to be a good basketball player. Now, it helps in certain circumstances to be bigger, but you know, you're not gonna wake up one day and find a 7-footer who runs, shoots, and plays basketball like Larry Bird. It doesn't happen very often. And if it did, you'd find a guy that everybody else is on. I mean, that's a difficult thing to do. But the guy that I always think about whenever I think about big guys, I think about the 2006 George Mason team. I think about that team made the Final Four. They were coached by Jim Larrañaga. You look at him, you go, yeah, this guy's good. He doesn't quite look the part. This is a team that their bigs were 6'7", 230, 6'7", 275. Boy, that sounds kind of familiar. 6'7", 215, 6'7", 240. That's their entire bigs. There were no guys over 6'7" on that team, and they made the Final Four. You look at a guy who can come in and be additive. This is a guy that if you throw the ball to him on the block, I think he can score points.
I do too.
And quite frankly, we got to have that with the loss of Terrell Miller. You've got to be able to score on the block. Not all the time. That might not be your number one game plan. But if you're going up against Belmont and it's tight, you've got to be able to say, okay, well, we have a play. We can get the ball with this guy here, and he's going to score 2 points 55% of the time.
And him just being a threat opens things up because
Absolutely.
They have to double down, and then you can kick it out to an open shooter.
Yeah, you think about the size that we can run out there on a lot of teams. You've got Sanchez on one side, and you've got Coward on the other side. Between those two guys, there's not a lot of teams that can match the physical nature of that. You're not pushing those guys off the block. You know, you're not going to move those guys. Now maybe you have Cowart come out and he can set some screens for you. Or you have Sanchez come out and he's already shown the ability to set screens for you. You've got this interplay where now you've got some guys who do different things. You don't have all of one guy. So you've got a guy like Anthony Smith who's a glass eater, who gives you 100% all the time, just needs to not foul as much. And you got a guy like Davis who's ball skilled, physically strong and gifted, might actually be a 3 as opposed to a 4. But now all of a sudden you've got a guy who's a 5. And he's skilled. With the ball in his hand, he's skilled. He can be a 5. Now all of a sudden you're taking pressure off of Breon Sanchez because you don't need him to do both jobs of being a 4, a big 4 that can come out and set screens, and a 5 who needs to stay on the block and score. Because that's not Breon's game. You need somebody who can score down there, and I think Darnell's going to be that guy. I want to see him come in physically, JUCO to D1. There's a transition. It takes time. Most guys, it takes at least a semester.
All right. We'll close with predictions for the starting lineup. Here's mine.
Okay.
Darnell Cowart at center.
Yep.
At power forward, Mike Davis. Shaq Buchanan will start at the 3. At the 2, I'm going with Tevin Brown, and the point guard is Ja Morant.
I'm going to look at this a little bit differently and not maybe not put the numbers on them because I think those are a little more fluid. I think you can go, the one is Ja Morant. I absolutely agree. I think you got it right with Tevin Brown and Shaq Buchanan on the perimeter. I think those three guys on the perimeter are pretty impressive. You got a guy who's extremely athletic, who can drive to the rim and make things happen. You've got Ja Morant, who does basically everything a human being can do with the ball and then some. And then you've got a great shooter in Brown with length. That's very powerful. I think mine change when I get to the post. I do think that we'll see. I think we'll see Sanchez start. And honestly, I think that early on Smith's going to get the starting role. He knows the system. It's going to be easier for him. Now, whether he plays starters minutes, that's really dependent upon his level, how he's progressed, and frankly, how good these JUCO guys coming in are. If Davis comes in and he's all world, he might take Smith's spot. If Darnell Court comes out and he's doing the things that we've seen him do on film, he probably takes that spot. And you've just got a really big lineup with great depth at just about every position. The only reason why you probably wouldn't see Sanchez and Court together is they play a very similar position. You don't want those guys picking up fouls quickly. But it's going to be interesting. I look forward to it.
That brings to a close this review of Murray State basketball.